Hey, y'all stuck around. That's great. Thank you. Let's see. Yeah, we can go forward. So that's me. Yeah, that's me. And you know, what I'd like to be able to do is make each one of you guys heroes for your own organization, being able to go out there and beat the bad guys, the evil actors that are out there trying to get access into your systems and get your data. Get into your computer cycles, stuff like that. So a little bit about me. I've been working in kind of the DevOps field. You remember Dan this morning talking about the databases? I started working with Dan probably, back in 2007, so a little over 10 years ago. And I remember him coming and talking to me probably about 2010, something like that, going, hey, there's this new thing in the field called DevOps. I'm like, what? What's that? It's a thing. It's here to stay, isn't it? Let's have a round of applause for DevOps, eh? So I'm with Sonatype. And just a few moments about us, not long there at all. Who here is a Java developer and worked with Maven? One of our CTO, one of our founders, actually helped create Maven. And so we've got a long history with open source, contributing to the community and things like that. And so he did that. Shortly after he created Maven, or helped create Maven, I don't think he can take all the credit for it, but shortly after he helped create it, he thought, wouldn't it be cool if there was a centralized place on the web where people could download these open source components? And so he created, and we continue to maintain and steward a website called Central Repository, or Maven Central, where when you run Maven and you download artifacts from the web, that's where they're coming from. And we've got about 146 billion components stored in that. Shortly after that, got to thinking, wouldn't it be cool if you have something like that on site? And so that led our founders to create something called Maven Repository, or Nexus Repository. Anybody here using Nexus Repository? Yeah. And it is the most popular binary repository out there at this point. 120,000 instances of it are out there running. So it really has been a good solution for a lot of companies. And now we still do and maintain that. We've adjusted a little bit. And one of the things that we do is we are looking at open source components and helping our customers, you guys, to make sure that what you're using is free from vulnerabilities. And I'll go into more details about that. But on an annual basis, we're evaluating 19 billion different components, open source components that are out there in the web. So open source. Who here uses open source? Puts it in your applications. Yeah, that's great. We've seen an acceleration of open source over the years that we've been doing this and watching it and looking at it. This is a representation or a graph of the, you got to have graphs in this stuff, right? The graph of the amount of downloads, annual downloads from Maven Central, going back to about 2008, and looking at that, and you can see it's just accelerating. Open source has really been very useful for the industry because we're all trying to move faster, do more in less time with less resources. Anybody have budget for more people to do less stuff? Yeah, I've yet to have anybody raise their hand on that question. We're not doing that. We're going faster, doing more with fewer people, fewer resources. I'll never die because I'll never catch up. I've got so much left out there to do. JavaScript is very similar. It's just ramping up like crazy and taking off. It's really fascinating to watch it grow and see how many people are using it. And what we've discovered, though, is that means that today's modern applications, about 80 to 90% of your application is composed of open source, different open source components. Would anybody have guessed that high of a number on that? Usually people are guessing maybe 15, 20%, something like that. Yeah, it's that high. So there's a lot of open source components that are out there. Now, when you do your traditional source code scanning, what you'll really be scanning is that 10 to 20% that you wrote. And you're basically ignoring that 80 to 90% that you're borrowing, that you're using from the outside. So that's where we want to be able to come in and help out with. However, there are challenges in the industry. And we look at this as a supply chain issue. It's a software supply chain. When you think about a supply chain, you've got parts coming in, you've got people that work on those parts or automation around that to be able to create a finished product on the other end. But a lot of industries have run into challenges with supply chain. Boeing's had their fair share of problems. A few years back, didn't they have some batteries that were catching fire or overheating in the airplanes? That was a big issue. A number of our cell phone manufacturers have had similar issues with components in their supply chain causing overheating and causing the phones to ignite. Glad I don't have that one in my pocket. And then 2011, there was a E. coli issue with, turns out, with lettuce. It took the regulators, FDA and other organizations, quite a while to figure out where that issue was coming from. First, they thought it was tomatoes from Italy and maybe something else from another country, and finally narrowed it down on what it is. It's just a matter of time before it really starts to strike everybody that's out there. Now, one of the things I've noticed that, recalls happen frequently. Anybody return something at Walmart or Costco and you're standing in line and you look over to that bulletin board, there's all these recall notices out there. There's government agencies that are responsible for keeping track of all this stuff and making sure that everybody's notified of that. When you get new tires or buy a new product, they always have that little postcard in there that you're supposed to fill out or website to go to. It's not just that they're trying to get your name for marketing purposes. They want to be able to contact you in case something is discovered that's wrong with the product so that they can fix that. Now, I have this up here to highlight the fact that the way we're being attacked is changing over time. Initially, I think we were really focused on being able to fend off attacks, and this is where the attacks are coming at, from the network perspective. So over here on the left-hand side, we had a bunch of guidelines, checklist, if you will. What should we do if, to protect ourselves from hackers? And it's really focused around things on the network. And then, you can see the OWASP list, top 10 things to be aware of from 2010. 2013, they added a new item on there, A9, using components with known vulnerabilities. That's something that we have run across a lot in our discussions with customers and talking to other people and things like that, is a lot of people are downloading components that have issues in it. And we should know better, so how can we help out with that? How can we fix that? And then I think as you go across the spectrum here towards the least understood over on the right-hand side, we can see that there are, to me this represents the microservices. I love the idea. I think it's great being able to have one application that focuses on one thing, really helps to innovate, be able to make changes quickly, deploy faster, easier. But I think it also increases the attack surface. And suddenly we don't have to know how to not only gauge the appropriateness or the validity of one application, but maybe 10, 15, 20 that all combine as microservices to form a complete application. So a lot of challenges in that I think we're just kind of starting to scratch the surface on. Another problem is not all parts are created equal. Open source is a good thing. I love it. And I think part of the rationale behind open source is when you think, well, maybe another analogy would work. When somebody, you got a general contractor building a house, he pours the foundation, builds the walls, and he probably has carpenters that have the skills to be able to build doors, build windows on site, make the cabinets, but does he do that? No. They contract that out. They have building supply places where they have those components brought in because they can be done better in those locations. The people that are doing that focus only on that, so they make those things very, very well. In a similar way, in our development environments, we want to be able to use components that people have already created that are of excellent quality, and I don't want to reinvent the wheel, right? So to me, that's where open source comes in. But how do we judge what's good and what's bad, what's working right and what's not? 2014 is really kind of where we really started to understand and see that there are issues in open source components. Anybody remember Heartbleed or Shell Shock? Yeah, those were kind of eye-opening and they're out there. 2015, there was an issue with an open source component called Commons Collection. One of the things that allowed hackers, or the evil actors, to be able to do was to hold data for ransom. This allowed them to get in and start to do that. This picture here is of a hospital that had its data held for ransom basically for a week. Now, can you imagine being a hospital, being a doctor, being a nurse, and not being able to get access to your patient records? Now, my daughter recently gave birth to a child, so we're very happy about that. But as I was walking through the hospital corridor to go visit her in her room, I noticed there's a nurse over there at a computer station typing in some stuff. A drawer popped out automatically, and a little case in there opened up for her to be able to get access to the medication that one of the patients needed. Now, think about if your records are locked. How are you going to be able to do that for your patients? They're going to be without maybe necessary pain meds or antibiotics or other things. I don't know that there were any recorded deaths from this, but possibly there were because surgeries would have been postponed. Medication is not being given out. So, these are real issues that we really need to be thinking about and taking care of. Another one that came out is a struts issue. This was back from 2013. What is notable about this one is some of the reasons why this was ranked so high in a CVSS score. It was network exploitable, no authentication required for exploit, allows unauthorized disclosure of information, among other things. And what that means is I don't have to be on the box to be able to get access to it or do anything to that. I don't even have to log into it. I can do things remotely, and the unauthorized disclosure of information is really a bad thing too. Now, where I'm leading with this is that back in March of 17, the FBI started to take notice of this. I believe it was on the 7th. They sent out notifications to the organizations that are signed up to receive their notifications like this, saying, hey, this is a bad thing, you guys need to go out and fix that. Anybody remember March 7th or thereabouts a couple of years back? How about now? Yeah, Equifax. That's what hit Equifax. There were a number of things that came together to hit Equifax. Number one is when this started to come out, or when it came out, they were doing a lot of the right things. They took notification, they took notice of that email that was sent out. They had a team. I'm sure they still have such a team, but a global threat monitoring and response team that took a look at that email and said, this is critical. We need to fix this. They sent out an email to, I think it was 430 people inside the organization to say, this is critical. We need to fix it within 48 hours. Unfortunately, that email didn't make it to all the people that should have received it. So there were at least one organization inside of Equifax that didn't receive that. And then there was another issue. They did have network monitoring equipment that would be able to capture the transmissions, encrypted transmissions across the network, and to decode that so they could see who it's going to, what kind of information's in there, request is in those transactions. However, about a year before, that equipment stopped working because there was an out-of-date SSL certificate on it. So this is kind of a perfect storm coming together, right? All these issues, people not getting the right email, the exploit in the open source code being there, and then a network equipment that's not set up right, a simple SSL certification that's out of date. That would have saved a lot of us a lot of pain, right? And so March 9th, they're hacked. They are broken into, and they have no clue. They don't know what's going on. The hackers, they were able to basically put a web shell inside this server, and from that, they were able to start explore. And you can see that we've got a probing attack on here, and so they were able to look around inside that machine. They found a file with some credentials in it, i.e. user IDs and passwords, unencrypted. Isn't that great? From there, they were able to get access to other machines, get access to databases, and they started to pull data from those databases. And so you can see in about May of 2017, they started to actually exfiltrate that data, take it out of Equifax and send it. I think most of the data ended up going to China as they were going back and looking at the information there. And so from May until August, or almost August, July 29th, this was going on. Finally, July 29th, they updated that SSL certificate, and suddenly the curtains were open and they could see what was going on. They saw what was going on, shut everything down, and then started to move into crisis management, which I think in some ways they are still in today, right? So, and this has been a massive effort for them. It's taken a couple of years for them to continue to recover from this. A lot of their management team has been replaced. And they have quadrupled their IT spending on security. So they're really taking some great steps on that. And I'm happy to say that now they are one of our customers, and they're taking some very positive steps toward making sure this doesn't happen again. So let's dig a little deeper. What about some of these open source components that are out there? We've studied, in this case, about 170,000 commonly downloaded Java components, different modules that a lot of organizations look at and study. And about 11%, 10 to 12% of those have known vulnerabilities in them. But yeah, we still see them being downloaded. JavaScript, almost half of the JavaScript NPM packages have vulnerabilities in them. That's kind of scary, isn't it? So what can we do? What can we do about this? Well, one thing we can learn from this is that we've got to be able to act faster. If you go back to 2006 or so, it took about 45 days between the discovery of a vulnerability to when it was actually exploited, when the hack was actually accomplished with it. You can see that the graphic kind of goes up and down over time. Then about 2015, it was about 15 days, so about 2 weeks. You had about 2 weeks to be able to respond before something would happen. Of course, that's on average. And then Equifax hit, and it was 2, maybe 3 days, depending on how you count and what you look at. That's a lot of compression of that time to be able to respond like that. Why is this an issue? Well, let's look at some of the economics of cybercrime. Why is this such an attractive thing? Which pays more, drugs or cybercrime? Any ideas? Well, let's look at some things. Which one has the least risk to the criminal? Cybercrime. Which one is the fastest growing? Cybercrime. Which one is the hardest to prosecute? Yeah, cybercrime. Which one is predicted to reach 2.1 trillion by 2019? That's this year, 2.1 trillion. I need to go back and change these slides, make it trillion instead of billion. But guess which one is predicted to reach 6 trillion in 2021, just a few years down the road? Organized crime is the most profitable type of crime that's out there. And if you look at the numbers, this goes back to 2016. You can see the drug trade was estimated to be worth $435 billion, cybercrime $450. And it's just going to get worse. The bad actors are getting better at what they're doing, so we need to get better as well. And so that ends up being about $800 per person to be able to recover, about $800 per person cost per person. That's a lot of money. Lots of money that's out there. Now, you may also be saying, well, I have nothing of value on my systems. There's nothing for somebody to come in and steal. We've had people tell us that before. There's nothing that somebody wants to come in and get. But your server has CPU cycles. Your visitors have CPU cycles. Your build infrastructure, even that has CPU cycles that are valuable to hackers because they're now all moving into cryptocurrency and injecting that into different open source components. For example, Jenkins, it was discovered that there's a crypto miner inside of Jenkins. Who uses Jenkins here? Yeah, and you might want to go check, make sure you're not running a crypto miner for somebody else out there. And so in that way, they're able to take advantage of your CPU cycles. They're stealing your CPU time, your memory, your cycles, to be able to mine for cryptocurrency, bitcoins. Other things we've found over time, I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but there's a lot of things that have been going out there. So such things as NPM packages that are typo squatting. So that means they create a malicious package that's spelled close to the one that you want, and they're relying on somebody to mistype something to pull in their bad stuff. Other things where Python packages or NPM packages are scraping credentials and sending that to bad actors. This one was interesting. Back in January 2018, a blogger wrote a blog that says, "I'm stealing your credentials, and I'm telling you how I'm doing it." And I think that was eye-opening for a lot of people. This one was also interesting. There was a maintainer of that Go bind data package who was tired of what he was doing, and he decided, "I'm going to quit," which is fine. I totally understand that. So he removed himself from his GitHub ID, basically deleted it. A bad actor found out about that, reclaimed that ID, and then started making changes to the package based on that guy's reputation. But he was basically impersonating the maintainer. And so he was able to put in some malicious code in that way. More Bitcoin mining, lots of other things that have been happening out there. So you can see that we're definitely being attacked, and no longer are we really being attacked. Well, I'm sure we're still being attacked through the network, but they're starting to shift. They're changing their attack vectors and trying to attack us through the applications themselves. And so that's where we need to be very careful about this kind of stuff. So those are things that we really need to be looking for. And even Docker has been hacked, where a number of accounts have been stolen from them. This was a fairly interesting one, where somebody came in and says, "We'd like to be able to inject some bad code into this." So let's find a package that looks good. We'll find a bug. We'll submit a fix to the bug that will also have the hack in it. And lo and behold, they did that. They found the bug. They put the hack in with the fix that they applied. It was accepted. It was added to the package. And so that was brought in. And then they were able to get associated with a bug bounty program and say, "Oh, look, we found a bug." Not telling you that we put it in there. We found a bug, and we fixed it. And so they got paid by the bug bounty program to fix the bug that they put in there. Is that not genius? No, don't get me wrong. I'm not advocating that you go off and find some place to get into cybercrime. Let's stay on the right side of the tracks here. All these applications, all these things are very interdependent and difficult to be able to find all the challenges that are out there. There was a study that came out, I think, I was made aware of it this week. A university in Germany did a study on a lot of the NPM packages and the dependencies between them and things like that. On average, they discovered that the average NPM package has 79 dependencies, maintained by 39 different projects. That's a lot of interdependencies, a lot of stuff to be looking at and trying to understand. It probably looks about like that. You know, what a mess trying to find in and pull that one thread and find out what's going on out there. Kind of pick a little bit more on NPM. You know, 1/3 of the US bandwidth is used by Netflix. The rest is used by the RM-RF node modules and NPM install. Don't know if that's accurate or not, but that's probably pretty close. You know, go back to the analogy of the iceberg. You know, you just put a few items in your package.json that you want to include, but you don't see everything that gets brought in beneath that. If you've ever watched the NPM install from the command line, see if I can get this word. It looks about like this, I think. It just keeps coming and coming and coming. So you think you only have a staff of 10 on your NPM development team, but you really have 400, because that one package on average brings in 39 other maintainers. Have you vetted all of them? Do you know what their credentials are and how they're doing things? So yeah, we need to be acting faster. Equifax comes along and it's 2 days between things. So there's a lot of things that are stacked up against us, and how do we respond to that? So last week I had the opportunity to attend a seminar, networking session in Atlanta, and Jamil Farshi, who is the current CISO of Equifax, was there. I like to come back to this because he's talking about some of the things that they have done to help fight against this. And so some of what they've looked at is variations in environments. How can they reduce variations in environments? So starting in about 2005, they went through a lot of acquisitions and brought in a lot of other companies into the Equifax family. And that produced a lot of complexity in those environments because of all these different ways of doing things coming from different companies being brought together. So it brought a lot of complexity and confusion into the mix. And so he was really focused on variations reduce the opportunity to be secure. So find ways that you can help reduce that variability in your environments. We've got a lot of sponsors around here that have the tools that we can use to be able to do that. Jennifer was talking about it this morning, of infrastructure as code. And being able to use things like Puppet and Chef, Ansible, to be able to build these things up from scratch. With that automation, you can be able to reduce that variations. Visibility, understand what your assets are, whether it's network, monitoring equipment, actual servers, or your open source components. Be aware of what you have out there and what you've got. Communication between teams. That was one thing that certainly impacted Equifax, is that they didn't know who the responsible people were for their applications, so they didn't get the emails to the right people to be able to go and fix the issues that they had. So communication, and really focus on behaviors and outcome. One thing that I thought was interesting coming out of that event was that a number of people were talking about they have changed their objectives for their people so that almost everybody has some measure of security in what they're doing. And what a great way to be able to make that key part of your organization's behavior is you start to measure those type of things. Automation. Those of us that have been in DevOps for a while, we love automation. How can we be able to reduce that risk of something going wrong because we mistype things? That also helps decrease that variability in what you're doing, things like that. So those things really come together with that automation and be able to increase capacity, because as we all know, as we talked earlier, we don't have more budget from our people. We have less budget, but we still have to do the same amount of stuff or more. And controls. Validate that the controls you have in place are working. Going back to Equifax, when the issue that they had controls. They had the network equipment to be able to monitor the traffic that was going back and forth. But it was really just a checkbox because they had not validated that it was working, that expired SSL certificate caused it to stop working. So they had a false sense of security. It was a lot of theater, basically. They thought they were doing great, but they didn't really go back and check and make sure that they had everything in place. Don't just check a box. Make sure it's working. One of the things we've also discovered, everybody has their own survey of DevOps and that kind of stuff. We have one that we call the software supply chain report, the software supply chain report. And one of the things we've been looking at with that is organizations without DevOps and organizations with DevOps. And when do you do security scanning and things like that? And so mature processes are really adding that into that whole process and being able to monitor that and make sure that's in place. And it really helps. In DevOps and in Agile, we've taken a lot of ideas from Edwards Deming. He was very key in helping rebuild Japan with his lean manufacturing ideas. And we've all gathered a lot of ideas from him. Some of what we have taken as helping with this fight against the hackers is the following 4 points. First is source parts from fewer and better suppliers. If you go off and look at Ford, Toyota, the other manufacturers, car manufacturers, they have done a great job of consolidating the number of suppliers that they've got so that they know who they're working with, they have the history with those people, they have the ability to be able to basically do audits and really follow up with them. And so that's part of what we're doing. We've got a lot of data on those open source components that are stored in Maven Central. We have insight into a lot of other things. So we're starting to gather that type of information and figure out how we can give it to our customers, our consumers, and use that better. Use only the highest quality parts. That's something we're doing today. As you are looking at the open source components you have in your applications, we're able to show you what's good, what's bad, what are the things that you need to be looking at along those lines. Never pass known defects downstream. What do we mean by that? We mean by being able to bring in governance into your processes and automation with that, so that if something is bad, you break the build, you break the deployment so that it has to be fixed. You make sure that that is in there. And continuously track every part. When you have a recall, like with your automobile, they only send notifications out to people that actually have those cars. They don't send a postcard to every Ford owner and say, you need to bring your car in and we'll look at it and see if it needs to be replaced. They know who needs to have that done. In a similar type of way, you want to be able to track those open source components. One of the things that we like to say is that open source ages like milk, not like wine. It doesn't get better with time. We find issues with it that need to be resolved and taken care of. So that's what we mean about being able to track those locations, track the locations of components throughout your whole process. And so this is where we can do that. We can block bad stuff from even entering into your infrastructure, into your stream, give your developers early feedback so that they can be looking at those components and identifying what's good and what's bad. And then policy enforcement throughout that whole process, and monitoring even when it's in the production state, so that, as we know, as we've said, open source does not age well. You can find those issues, know what components need to be fixed, and be able to do that. So thank you so much for your time. If you have any questions, we'll be down in the sponsor room, and I think I am done. Are any questions?
Thank you. Thank you. Great job.